All right, team. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so excited to have Brendan here, the CEO and co-founder of Mercor. We're going to be answering a few questions that came in ahead of time that are top of mind for you, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Sound good? All right. With that, we'll get started. Question number one.
Well, and first of all, excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me, but yeah, thrilled to jump in.
Yeah, we'll jump right in. So, when you were young, you told me backstage that you had some really interesting first jobs that I thought would be helpful in providing context for the team here about how you got to where you are. What was some of those first jobs for you?
Well, so I had a dozen different side hustles in one form or another growing up, but one of my favorite memories was selling donuts in 8th grade, where I noticed that Safeway donuts sold for $5 a dozen, and that my friends would pay $2 for each donut. So I would bike to Safeway, buy Safeway donuts for $5 a dozen, sell them to my friends, and then I wanted to scale it up, so I started paying my mom $20 to drive me in her minivan to Safeway, then selling tens of dozens of donuts each week. I had competition pop up, and so they were selling Chuck's Donuts, which if anyone doesn't know are on the peninsula, this higher end donut, but they had a higher cost basis. So I dropped my prices to $1 for 2 weeks to drive them out of business. Didn't know about anti-competitive practices at the time. The principal called me into their office to say I had to stop selling donuts because I wasn't supposed to do so on school campus. So I moved my donut stand 10 feet off of school campus. And so I had all of these fun, different anecdotes growing up. Just always loving to work on projects and sell things and build things. And so it was a lot of fun.
So let me get this straight. The first people you monetized were your friends, with quite a big markup of donuts, and the first employee you had was your mom.
Exactly, lucky me. So.
What could go wrong with that?
Yeah.
What else were you up to when you were younger?
Let's see, so that was middle school. In high school, I started this business doing AWS consulting, where I realized that a lot of my friends were eligible for AWS startup credits, and there were small businesses or startups that they were running, but they weren't applying to claim those credits. A lot of them didn't have websites to fill out the application, all this kind of stuff. So I started charging $495 to build a website for them, help them apply, get their AWS credits. And then I did that a few hundred times when I was in high school. And so I was making a bunch of money and didn't want to go to college. I was like, this is awesome, I'll just do this full time. But eventually my mom persuaded me to go to college, first employee. Yeah, exactly. And so, that was another fun escapade.
And how did you land in the land of software for recruiting?
Yeah, I mean, it grew out of a lot of those experiences early on. I think, as with many people in this room, early stage founders, the hardest problem in scaling is always how do you build your team, right? This problem of processing so many different people, finding people that are interested in doing it. And it just felt like all of the processes for how people find candidates and assess them and match them with jobs are enormously antiquated. And we could build far more efficient processes to automate everything with Mercor.
That's amazing. And walk us through some of your metrics so that we understand the scale of what you're building. What can you share with us?
Yeah. So it's been pretty wild. Insofar as what's public, we scaled from 1 to 100 million in revenue run rate in 11 months. So fastest growing out of pretty much any company in Silicon Valley. Haven't shared other updates in terms of top line from there, but we're well over 500,000 users. We have done many hundreds of thousands of interviews across all kinds of roles, ranging from software engineering to medicine, law, finance, HR. And so it's been an exciting time. We work with, we work with 6 out of the Magnificent 7. We work with all of the top 5 AI labs. And so it's all happened very quickly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Can you give me a quick round of applause? So walk us through kind of your founding story. I think so many of us in the room have that aspiration. How did everything kind of click together for you?
Absolutely. So it ties to the question earlier of thinking a lot about hiring growing up in companies I was building. And initially, I was working with my best friends from high school, who I met when I was 14, and we were building a lot of software for fun. And so we wanted to do that faster. We would hire engineers internationally in India. We partnered with the Code Club at IIT Kharagpur to hire people, build projects, and match them with our friends, because our friends asked to hire engineers as well. And as we saw ChatGPT taking off, we realized that there were all of these processes that we were doing manually, and how we would manually review resumes, manually decide who to hire, and manually conduct all of the interviews that went into that, that we could automate with LLMs. And so we did that iteratively while we were scaling the business, dropped out of college, and then scaled up from there.
If you have any advice for people who are maybe, they have some product market fit, there's some semblance that things could work out, and they're considering, should I bet at all?
I think go for it. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased because I didn't want to go to college in the first place. I tend to be very against a lot of the well-defined career tracks, but I just think that what framed it for me, and I think should for many people here, is that now is the most exciting time in history to build a company. Like, the difference between what's possible with AI and what's been actualized in the economy is so large, there's so much to do, that it would, if there's any time to do it, it would be now. And I think that many more people should chase after that, choose the thing that they love doing and want to do for the next 10 years and commit to it.
It's not a bit of an obsession.
Absolutely.
Right?
In fact, one thing that I always felt is I've never been super disciplined. Like, I was not great at, like, you know, always doing my college homework on time and all of that, or holding myself accountable to whatever exams I need to study for. It was much more about obsession, about, like, find the problem that you can't stop thinking about. Where even when you're, like, hanging out with your friends, your mind just, like, comes back to it, because you need that level of commitment and longing to spend the next 10 years on it. And so it's all about finding that.
Some of the founders I've supported say, like, find a problem you can be obsessed about 24/7. Why was that hiring for you?
I think it's because it feels like it's the most important problem in the world, but everyone does every day, right? Of, like, how we spend our time. Yet at the same time, it's so under-addressed, right? Like, there's so few companies that are actually working on this problem of talent allocation. And so it felt like there was this big divide in that way, and correspondingly an enormous opportunity to solve so much of the inefficiency that we saw in the market.
I know we have some founders here today who are making some of their first hires. What advice do you have with those first, let's say 10 hires that you make?
I think for the first 10, it's keep as high a bar as possible. Like, this advice is redundant intentionally. Don't compromise. I remember we were incredibly patient for our first 10. And that is because those people will shape the next 100, right? And will be the most important decisions that you make in scaling your company. And so I think especially for the first 10, I think you get to a point, as we were discussing, where there's always a trade-off between speed and quality. You should always keep a high bar, but eventually, like, you need to build the team. And so, but I think for the first 10, the highest bar as possible.
I think of it as not needing to build the team, but getting to build the team.
Totally.
It's such a joy to invite people on the journey that you're on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so, finding the right people is always top of mind.
Can we talk about your most recent fundraise?
For sure.
You had a big one. Congrats.
Thank you.
Very fast growth.
Yeah.
What were some lessons that came from that experience?
Yeah. Well, we've had a fortunate fundraising history, because when we first dropped out, it was sort of like the only time we somewhat ran a process, and then our Series A and our Series B, the investors just saw the business inflecting. And so they, at our Series B, I think they talked to some of our customers, they heard some of the numbers, and then it moved pretty quickly from there. But I think one thing I've learned to your question is that a lot of people treat fundraising as like an outcome, and that's totally wrong. It's an input to building valuable products and experiences for users. And so trying to spend as little time as possible thinking about fundraising and getting back to spending time on customers as much as possible is definitely one of the largest takeaways.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in controlling what you have control over.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that is staying centered on who you're building for and why. It's actually kind of similar, IPO is just one milestone. The real work happens after you become a public company. Have you thought about that at all?
We're still a young company. I mean, we were founded in January 2023, and so we're trying to not think about that too much, but maybe eventually in the future. I think that there's obviously a lot of great parts of being a public company, a lot of drawbacks as well, and one of the most important things for me right now is making sure that we're very long-term oriented around what are the things that matter on a 10-year time horizon, and I think part of being a private company is that you get to have those kinds of flexibility and investment time horizons, and so we like it for now, but it's not forever, and so we'll see when things change.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I want to bring us back to a few months ago. That's how quickly his business is growing. It's absolutely insane. Mm-hmm. A few months ago, and you're kind of crossing that 100-person threshold. You're up to 140.
Exactly, yeah.
What has changed as you've evolved and grown the culture of the company?
Yeah, I think that you get to a point where I think initially it feels like a friend group almost, right? You're hiring very slowly and you have a lot of time to get to know everyone, right? And interview everyone and all of this. And eventually you get to the point where you don't know everyone. You need to have the processes that a business would have. And so it feels a little bit unfamiliar, and certainly takes some getting used to, but it's a process, and it's obviously an important part of growing up, so to speak. So
we were talking backstage about how most weddings are 150 people. That's kind of the natural span of familiarity that most people have.
Yeah.
And you're kind of reaching that threshold.
Exactly.
As a founder and CEO, how have you thought about scaling yourself?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is how many people you have in your team that you really trust, where it's like they can quarterback an initiative and take something that you give to them or work on with them all the way to the finish line. And so I think that's most important, almost like each individual that you have immense trust in, and trying to have as many of those people throughout the org, because you can't expect that people on day 1 or even day 30 are going to get there. It takes building context, having the right training, the right culture, all the right experiences to get there.
Mm-hmm. Something that I think about is how can you get to your first agreement with a new hire really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's one of your direct reports, because you really get to see how you actually work that out together.
Yeah.
How have you thought about that as you've hired some of your directs?
Yeah, what do you mean by first agreement? Like first sort of win or thing that you're working
together? First disagreement.
Oh, disagreement,
right? Like
yeah.
when the rubber meets the road, how are we going to work through this together?
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know when you're thinking about interviewing people to report directly to you, how do you suss that out?
Yeah, one characteristic I really like about certain people on my team is having strong opinions loosely held, where they have immense conviction in whatever idea they're telling to me, but when they're presented with an idea that is counter to that or data or evidence against it, they change their mind very quickly. And I found that that's a very good habit and value. So indexing on that and people that make decisions, and sometimes it's their call, sometimes it's mine, but always trying to have a very thoughtful way of arriving at that answer. So
we'll talk about your culture a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
So scaling your culture is one of the hardest things to get right, and one of the easiest things to get wrong, it seems, even when it feels right.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what have been some of those cultural, uniquely you things that you want Mercor to keep.
Yeah, so there's three values that jump out the most that we always preach to everyone. The first one is having a can-do attitude, in that when we set really high goals, the decision making forms around those goals to optimize for much larger outcomes. So people that have this sense of optimism and ambition around how they approach problems is very important. The second is having really high standards, going back to hiring, and keeping a really high bar for who we want to work with, what we expect of them is incredibly important. And I think one of the most largest differentiators between the legendary companies and those that don't get there. And then the third is intensity, and that we work really hard. And if you look at the early cultures of all of the greatest businesses, they work like no one else. And so I think that's important to maintain as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. I think it's easier to screen for optimism. Might even be easier to screen for, work ethic with backdoor, back channel references. I'm curious about that second one that you pointed out. How do you blend that into your recruiting experience?
Yeah, well, so one of the most important things for people that I hire that are going to be hiring other people is looking at how well they've done that in the past, right? So talking with them about who are the people they previously hired, talking to those people to see their experiences with them, I find gives a really good sense for it. And then also doing so iteratively, where I'll sit in on the decisions and obviously talk to the candidates that they're first hiring to make sure that we're on the same page about who we're really excited to work with.
Some of the best hires I've ever made in my career were from reference checks.
Yeah.
I think you always ask, who else should I be speaking with who worked with this person? And even if you can't get the person on the call as a candidate, they will generally take your call as a reference. And then you can evaluate them and see how they might work in your company.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I haven't done that. We'll have to try that.
Yeah. Let's talk about your product a little bit. Can you walk us through the power behind Mercor?
Absolutely. So it goes back, the right mental model is really automating all of these manual processes and
repetitive processes.
Exactly, repetitive processes. And the way I think about our product over a long time horizon is that there's three big things that we need to get right. We know that there's a lot that will change, but for the duration of the business, our customers will always want more candidates available on our platform. They'll always want better matching with those candidates, and they'll always want to be able to hire more quickly. And so in many ways similar to Amazon, optimizing around each of these big things over a long time horizon is what's most important to achieve a lot of the end outcomes and customer experiences that we're looking for.
How does matching work?
Matching is
That's a tough one.
the most challenging problem, because there's sort of two sides to it, both of which are very high dimensional. The first side is the candidate interested in the job, right? And so there's all the characteristics of the role, the people they'd be working with, the compensation of that role, the other opportunities they have present. And so we have models that predict the probability that said candidate is interested in the job. The other side of it is from the company perspective of what is the probability that said candidate will perform well on the job once they're hired. And so you need to collect all of the performance data as your eval set to make better predictions around what are the types of interview responses and the characteristics on people's resume and all of that predict that they're going to do well on a particular job. And it's the blend of those two problems that really go into matching effectively.
I love that. Something I've always struggled with is the bias that creeps into the human decision making that is part of the recruiting process. Walk me through how you think about that within your technology.
For sure. I mean, I find it so fascinating because so much of the way people hire is very vibes-based, right? Of like, does this person seem like I get along well with them? And it's not data-driven around who's going to perform well on the job and what are all of the features that actually prove that that person is more likely to succeed. And so I think the first answer is grounding everything in performance data. Obviously, you need to be thoughtful around how you're evaluating performance and thoughtful about that. But so much as you can do that, it's the most effective way to make decisions and optimize for the right thing that you should be hiring for. And I think the second thing is that in automated systems, you can get very thoughtful about the features that you consider. One example of that is that when humans are interviewing, we consider all of the vibes. When our AI interviewer is talking to people and evaluating interviews, it can just look at the transcript, the substance of what people say, right? Leaving out all of the multimodal aspects of whether that person sounds like us or looks like us and all of that. And so I think it's those two things of grounding in the outcomes that we should be grounding in and effectively looking at the data that we should be looking at to optimize around that. That are most important in approaching and structuring this problem of bias.
That's fascinating. What about nuance? I mean, does that matter?
It does. I mean, a big part of who we hire is the vibes matter in some ways, right?
Matter.
Yeah, it goes back to you want to hire people that you'll love to work with and will be your friends. And so there's a little bit of a balance there. I think that our mission as a platform is very much to avoid that bias and to have as much transparency as possible around who we think is going to be as successful as possible in the particular role. But at the same time, a lot of the time humans will make the final call. And there are some things that they should consider that they shouldn't. And there's others that, it's the way it is and the people that they get along well with.
What I appreciate about your product, though, is that a lot of those bias decisions happen early in the recruiting experience, right? There's confirmation bias, there's like-me bias, there's proximity bias.
Absolutely.
And you're negating a lot of that by utilizing your software early so that when you get to that end stage, you can apply the human judgment in a way that might matter more.
Precisely. I remember when we started the business, we were processing tens of thousands of applicants from software engineers in India. And the most biased part about it by far was that we could interview less than 1% of candidates, right? As with most early career hiring processes. And so over 99% of people were being ignored out of no fault of their own, just because they weren't able to go to the best school, maybe because they couldn't spend thousands of hours studying for the JEE India standardized test, or they couldn't afford to go to the best college. And so allowing you to consider everyone in that hiring process, I think, is the most meaningful driver and actually affording all of the equitable opportunity that everyone really strives for.
I think that's really meaningful. You're diversifying the top of the funnel so that when you get to your final few candidates, you can apply that level of judgment, taste, perspective that is really valuable, I think, when you're making that final decision.
For sure.
So, what can you share about your fundraising history?
Let's see. So we started the business January 2023. We bootstrapped it to $1 million revenue run rate before we dropped out of college. Initially, we didn't want to raise because...
What did your parents say?
Well, the funny thing is that our parents were not impressed at all by the $1 million in revenue run rate. But when we raised our $2.3 million seed round, that's when it all felt like everything was going to be okay. And so is the
Is it the validation?
Exactly. I think it's that someone more credible is willing to give us money, and so that stamp of approval was meaningful to them. And then and our seed round was with General Catalyst, and then we were really focused just on product and not scaling up as much for the subsequent, call it 6 months or so. And then we saw this huge transition underway in the human data market, where it used to be this crowdsourcing problem of how do you find a bunch of low and medium skilled people that are writing barely grammatically correct sentences for the early versions of ChatGPT that everyone is familiar with Scale AI solving. But we realized that it was transitioning away from crowdsourcing towards this sourcing and vetting problem of how do you find some of the most exceptional people in the world that can work directly with AI researchers to help push the frontier of model capabilities. And the platform that we've been building for the prior year and a half was perfectly positioned for it. And so we went
right time, right product.
Yeah, there's a lot of fortune and luck in finding the right market. And so we went to OpenAI and we shared our vision of how the world was going to change. And they, along with all of the other top AI labs, correspondingly brought us in. And I remember Benchmark invested at a $250 million valuation for 10% dilution when the business was at $1.5 million in revenue. And we were like, no, this is such a discount because we know that the business is about to inflect. They thought we were absolutely crazy at the time. And then our Series B was 4 months later, $2 billion valuation, but a lower revenue multiple at a $20 million revenue run rate because the business was growing so quickly. And have obviously grown another order of magnitude since then. And so it's been certainly beyond our wildest expectations.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can only imagine the ride that you've been on.
Yeah.
And how old are you? I
just turned 22 in April.
For those of you who cannot hear on the podcast, we have some giggling in the audience. What did you do with the money?
Well, the business is very profitable, and so we have significantly more money than we've ever raised. But we are always looking for ways to invest much more strategically, and in the things we talked about, right? Of like any way that we can really efficiently build our user base to have more candidates available for our customers, any way that we can have better matching and faster hiring for our customers are the core focuses. So all of the engineering and product investments around that. But one of the things that investors don't love is that you can only sort of deploy capital into a business so quickly while being thoughtful. And so it's always the balance of that. Trying to move as fast as possible while also being thoughtful and sensible.
It's a hard challenge, right? Because in some ways you want to pour gas onto the growth, get your top line up. You also want to protect, your culture and scale smartly, not too quickly. So everything has been butterflies and rainbows.
Well, not exactly, right? Like
Let's talk about some of the hard stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I remember before it really started working, it felt like this roller coaster where it oscillated between the best day in the world when we'd sign a big customer contract. We worked with a lot of seed stage customers, so the customer would go out of business the next month, and it felt like the worst day in the world. And it was just very, very tumultuous. And I think it was once it started really working and we saw the inflection, it was a little bit more consistent, but there's still this very strong hedonic treadmill where within 3 months you get acclimated to the new thing, and then it raises your expectations, and every day there's a new thing that's popping up that I have to worry about. And so I think it's always less glamorous than people think on the outside, because running a startup that's growing quickly is always bound to come with a million problems.
Good problems to have.
Good problems to have, but problems nonetheless.
Yeah. How do you keep that perspective? The highs are never as high as they feel, the lows are never as low as they feel.
Yeah, I think it's about being very long-term oriented.
I like that.
I find that it's easy to reflect on something that happened this week and think, I didn't have to deal with that thing last week, so this week is horrible, right? But if I zoom out to where were we last year or the year before that, it gives a lot of perspective around broadly things are going pretty well. And where will we be next year and in 10 years? Because ultimately that's what matters. And it's hard to say that in the moment. Everyone gets sucked into the day-to-day of all the problems that they have. But trying to always ground ourselves in that is what's most helpful at that.
Yeah, I like that quite a bit. Something that I've been thinking about and reflecting on as your journey between becoming, a leader of people to a leader of managers to a leader of function to a leader of company is how do you kind of be that mirror to provide this steady perspective about let's keep our eye on the long term, let's keep our eye on the prize.
Absolutely.
Do you find yourself doing that for your org?
I do, and I find that how you do that changes over time as well.
Yeah.
Like I think early on it's about great storytelling of what will the world look like in 10 years. And that remains important, but I think one of the changes is grounding that storytelling in metrics of what is the North Star metric that matters? What are all the things that feed into that? These numbers that you can compound over a decade because you know that those will drive immense customer value. And that's something that I've certainly gained more of an appreciation for over the last year or so. And a lot of our investors and advisors have been really helpful with formulating.
Yeah, I think something that we were talking about behind the stage that might be helpful for the team was how you have to adjust or amplify your altitude, I guess, as you get more and more people on your team. How have you thought about that? You go from your founders who know you and love you and you're in the trenches together to a new hire who's going to hold on to your word.
Yeah.
Every single word is gospel.
Yeah, well, what you said earlier resonated with me in that you need to be far more thoughtful as people, right, aren't considering all of the other context that comes with that. And so I think like my attitude early on was move as fast as possible. Let's like move fast and break things, and that I would just like send 1,000 customer messages a day and always be checking in on every different product area. And there's still a time and a place for that. But I think knowing when to zoom out, when to be really thoughtful about this email that's going to hundreds of people and is going to, change what they're going to work on for a certain period of time is really important. And so I think having those different levels that you operate at with different audiences and different contexts.
Yeah, the way that I think about it, the mental model that I use is there are two-way doors and there are one-way doors. 90% of your decisions in growing a company, at least at your sizing stage, maybe 95% are two-way doors. You can back out of it if it ends up being the wrong decision, so you want to optimize for speed. Hiring is one that is probably it's a difficult back out.
Yeah.
Right? Especially in some regions that you operate in.
Certainly, yeah.
So I think about those one-way doors as needing to be much more intentional and mindful and really doing the hard work to evaluate, is this the right decision?
Yeah, that resonates a lot.
Have there been any of those one-way doors that you've said, ooh, I wish I would have done that differently?
Let's see. I think there's always a handful of candidates that we've hired, of course, as you mentioned, where it hasn't worked out, whether it's us not being a good fit for them or them not being a good fit for us. And so I think always trying to be as thoughtful as we can before making the decision of who we should work with. And that is really the right decision for them is really important, as well as, of course, being the right decision for us. So.
I think the more authentic you can be early in the interview experience, the better self-selection.
This is certainly true, yeah. And I think one thing we've had a lot of success with is just working with people, especially early on for the first 10, just working with them, seeing how they like it, let them fall in love with the product and the customers and the vision, and then everything else will sort itself out.
Yeah, I like the working session. I find that you can figure out so much more about a candidate when you actually get in a room, or the metaphorical room, and you're problem solving real life situations that you're going through.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's talk about some of your favorite habits and tools.
Of course. Other than Notion, or well,
I figured to say that. No. Well, we can definitely talk about Notion, but I'm curious to know, like, what have you leaned on as a CEO founder? What tools have helped you?
Well, I am serious in saying I use Notion a ton. In fact, even so much is like UI inspiration, because Notion's obviously beautiful. And so one of our front-end engineers always jokes that I'll never be annoyed with front-end if they just make it look more like Notion.
I will be very happy.
Yeah. But beyond Notion, I like using Superhuman a lot. Not quite a Notion male adopter yet. And yeah, those are probably the tools where I spend the most time in. And then I use Slack and Google Workspace for different customers. So yeah, a lot of the time when we're working with big enterprises, they want us to use their tools for meetings or documents or whatever. So we always have to have all of the different office suites available.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I would love to ask you some questions about that, but I will spare you.
Of course, Notion, I always want to come back to that.
I love to hear that. Which Notion workflow or template would you think would be most valuable for these founders?
I use it most to track relationships, whether it's customers or candidates. I find it very helpful. Less so a template from the community, more so that I love that it's very flexible in being able to configure all of the different dimensions and have charts that spin up to show me the analytics on our pipeline and how we're doing. And so those sort of analysis where, because an issue with spreadsheets is you can't like click in and have the page that you're editing. And so that's the reason that I love it so much, that you can have a document embedded within each of the cells and units that are stored in the database.
Yeah, the database is really incredibly helpful. And
Yeah.
having that context on our platform.
Absolutely. Well, this is one thing we were talking about a lot on our team, is that Notion AI can now connect with all of our different knowledge bases. I think my co-founder sent a message like ignorance is now unacceptable because people should just ask questions, the knowledge base. And so
I remember when Google became a verb. Let me Google that for you.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm waiting for it. Let me Notion that for you.
Exactly.
It's only a matter of time.
For sure.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about how you use Notion. What about our AI products?
Yeah, I really like drafting things with them, of course. I think it's the first one. And then I think the second thing is the knowledge-based retrieval. Especially, I know the connectors are newer, but as those develop over time to not just read from all of our applications, but also write in all of them, I think that's really exciting, because ultimately context is at the heart of all productivity, and having the tool that has all the context on our interactions is the most important way to leverage that.
Yeah, I was actually giving a team member of mine feedback right before I came over here to interview you, and she was kind of being silly in front of a bunch of coworkers, and she said, my HR boss thinks that I'm being too corporate and too HR. She wants me to speak in more human language. How would Katy say this? And the actual result was very meaningful. It picked up on the nuance and the context of how I talk in real life. And I think that that's what's going to hold a lot of companies back, is not having that knowledge base in one cohesive area.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah.
Love that. All right, team. Well, I know we want to get to some Q&A, but we ask every founder 2 questions to round us out before we move to that. The first one is, this is founder to founder advice. What's one building block of advice you leave behind for early stage founders?
I think it's find the thing that you're obsessed with, because self-discipline will only go so far. It's the problem
Especially if you're not disciplined to begin with.
Especially if you're not disciplined to begin with, right? It's a thing that you can't stop thinking about, and you just need to keep coming back to, because that's the draw that will last for the decade that it takes to build a business.
I love that. Thank you. And my last question is, if you had to rebuild Mercor from scratch today, what is the first block you'd start with?
I think it would be the team, because I think that early on you do a lot to discover the market and the problem and what it needs to look like, versus now that I have more of an understanding of that, it's like I need to have the people that I really trust in place to execute. And so it all does come back to hiring in one way or another.
Doing it great.
Yeah.
Right? Doing it great with people who want to build it.
Absolutely.
I love that. All right. Thank you.